Hello, this is Jenny Clark with Solvability. In today's session, we're going to talk about something I'm calling benchmarking. For government contractors that are small businesses, how do you compare to your peers? What should you prioritize? And I'm really thinking about it as how do you create your own roadmap for growth? So as we're talking about that, in meeting with a client, we discussed what do people need to be to get to the point where they can be their own prime contractor, because that's going to give them control over the work and put them in a much better position to grow and become more competitive as they go along. And he drew this chart that had the different areas inside the company that he was able to explain to me. When I first started, I wore all these hats. I brought in a business partner and we shared them. Now our next stage of growth is to figure out when and how we fill these positions, these functions, who takes over these activities, who gets them off of our desk, so we can grow and focus as CEO and COO on getting new work and running the business operation overall, growing from there. So the areas he broke it into were F&A for finance and accounting, BD for business development, human resources, program management, contracting, and what I call risk management, or RM. So let me give you a quick description of what each one of those might mean. Finance and accounting, that's how everybody gets paid. That's where all the money flows through. But it also includes financial strategy and how we're going to move forward and how we're going to get the money to grow. So in general, it encompasses bidding, billing, reporting, and fiduciary relationship. In bidding, obviously, how we're going to decide what we're going to price and what we're going to work on and what our forward pricing is for all this activity. Given that we are going to win some contracts, what's our process for billing that? What's our process for keeping up with those billings and the cumulative we're spending? What about reporting? Do we have monthly financial statements? Are they accurate? What kind of analysis do we do about the revenue and profitability of all of our contracts and the company as a whole? And fiduciary is, generally speaking, knowing that in order to get lines of credit, in order to get financing, we're having to prepare accurate information that we're signing off on. We're certifying those statements. We're saying this is as true as I know it to be. A fiduciary responsibility also means that we're protecting the company and the employees of the company and the owners of the company as part of the finance and accounting, or F&A, function. So let's talk about BD, or business development. That is a huge, broad area, and I've simplified it just to say, how are we getting new customers and how are we taking care of them so they'll give us follow-on work? What programs, what agencies, what type of work are we going after? And how are we building inside our company methods and teams to really serve that community, serve that customer, serve that program, and grow inside an agency or in related programs? What are our strategies? Are we going to have lots of offices or just a headquarter? Are we going to go off to do a lot of work in DC, or do we want to focus on specific market areas? Are we going to go work overseas? Are we going to have things in other locations? What is our strategy there? What kind of work are we pursuing? Is it cost plus? Is it time and material? Is it all fixed price? These are all part of the strategies, and it's not just the business development team that makes that decision. Obviously, they're led by the executives who have to share that vision. And then lastly, under business development, I went ahead and put the category of branding, how you present yourself, what your website looks like, what your capabilities brochure looks like, how you approach your customers, how you take care of your customers. What they see from you as a company is really mostly the outward-facing business development. The first thing you do is start winning contracts. Put yourself on payroll, put other people on payroll as you're bringing them on to fill those contract execution requirements. So human resources becomes pretty much the next thing that you've got to be considering. So it's recruiting, it's getting your resume database, it's getting the people on board, it's making sure that they are taken care of and feel welcome, it's making sure that they understand who they're going to work for, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and make them feel like they're part of your employee company community. Retention is a very big piece of that, making sure that the people that you got are happy, staying, growing in their careers, and feel like they have a future with your company, because otherwise all the effort and time you took into finding them, they could be snatched up by somebody else, or, as usual, walk across the hall, put on a different badge, and they think they've got a better deal because you didn't really have the retention that they wanted from you, or something else came up. Lastly is the whole process of resumes, and by that I don't just mean the resumes that you collect from people, but also your internal resume database that says, I've got these people with these qualifications, they're going to meet these labor categories. How do I group them? How do I find somebody that's got this particular skill as a RF engineer, for example, and that they have 7 years in that at a minimum, plus they have a degree in physics. The resume database is so critical, being able to keep up with those resumes, keep in contact with a number of those people that have applied, that you might have bid on a contract that you've got to track back down when the contract finally comes in, or survives protest and keeps coming back to you, whatever it is. But human resources is typically the center of where that occurs, although obviously everybody in the company is involved in that. PM for program management. What are you doing as far as customer response? Who's keeping track of where we are with the customer and the project? Where are we in contract execution? Are we meeting our deadlines? Do we have the right staffing? Is the customer happy? Are we delivering what we said we would? What's our team performance like? Is everybody that's working for that customer delivering the value that you expect them to as a member of your team, as a member of your company organization, representing you? What about the technical workforce? What are we going to do to keep those skills up? What are we going to do to continue to develop them? Are we intending to expand? Those tend to be all program management roles. And for program management, the other really critical point is knowing exactly where we are in the process, what its cost, in its schedule, the hours, where are we going, what else does the customer need? And because many times the program manager is talking to the customer on a regular basis, are we able to scoop up some of those opportunities that we hear about in our day-to-day interaction? K is for contracts, and by that I mean who's keeping track of completing the reps and certs when you're doing proposals, who's keeping track of the deliverables and making sure those are complete, who's keeping track of the contract value and the modifications, getting paperwork signed, getting period of performance extended, changing information about the customer, keeping track of all that and coordinating it, and who has the authority to sign contracts, commit, who's talking to the customer. Are they talking to the CEO of the other company? Are they talking to a contract administrator at a large prime? Are they talking to a contracting officer? All of that information has to flow together, and having processes for all of this is really the critical part. The last section of it is what I've been calling risk management, RM. And that's because it's such a broad area that companies are having to look all the way across their organization to say, what are we doing today to do the things right, put the processes in place, and what do we do to mitigate any risks that we're aware of if we can? And how do we make decisions over whether we're going to run the risk because we can't afford to have that done right now, or we're taking an active choice to say, we're going to get insurance, or we're going to get legal advice, we're going to do something so we reduce that risk and make sure that we're covered, because all of this is about resource management. Where do you spend? When do you spend? What are you protecting? What are you building? So risk management could be legal, insurance, it could be related to contracts and proposals. It could be related to anything along that process, because everything you're doing has legal significance, paperwork, documentation, signatures, authority that you're having to think about. And then the last component that I did want to include under risk management is anything related to security. And of course, that could be your FSO and security clearances. It could be physical security. It could be cybersecurity. It could be IT security. And so all of those are part of the risk management of the company that are really serving all of the other organizations to make sure everyone in the company is able to be protected. So let's talk about specific benchmarks that I tend to measure when I'm looking at companies and their maturity their ability to grow and their ability to scale. When a company starts out as a small federal contractor, number one thing they're trying to do is get some work in so that the owner and the partner or whoever it is can get paid so that they are doing some work, they're covering their own cost, and they're starting to grow. The next thing they're starting to do is bring in more people. So finance and accounting happens almost as soon as you get anything, because you've got to be able to invoice for the work you've got. You have to have some reporting systems in place so you can tell your government customer where you are in that project and where you need to be. You've got to have reporting to let yourself know financially how the company's doing. Are you profitable? When are you going to have cash coming in? How are we doing on all of these things? The next section I like to look at under benchmarking for finance and accounting is what I call financial capabilities. Financial capabilities to me mainly means, am I still using a factoring company, or am I using asset-based lending, or can I get a line of credit? What do I have to do that? Because I've got to show solid financials. I've got to show profitability. I've got to be able to show the ability to repay that loan. If I don't have access to that, my growth will be limited. And sure, I can do a certain amount of money just off credit cards, but can I thrive with that? Can I grow fast? Can I accommodate overnight growth without having financial capabilities? Financial capabilities are being able to show where you are financially. Maybe you have reviewed financial statements. Maybe you have some other information that you can show. Here's my internal financial statements. They're up to date. They're current. We've got projections. We know where we're going. All of those things that are required to show a business case or a business model that proves that you as a company are financially secure, profitable, able to repay your loans, and therefore ready to grow. A third component of benchmarking under finance and accounting is pricing. Now, pricing is a very broad area. It could be pricing for your proposals. You're responding. They give you a format. They give you a spreadsheet. You got to figure out how to fill that out. People are always asking, well, how do I come up with the labor rates? These aren't people I have on board. What do I do to get that information? How do I escalate? What do I put in for growth? What do I put in for my budget? How do I back up my indirect rate estimate? I'm really just having to take a guess at what it is. And is that right? Is that the direction I need to be going? How much profit should I bid? What percentage G&A is typical for my company and competitors in this market? Is this in a tight market where there's a lot of competition and I've got to be very price sensitive? Or am I getting ready to respond to something that's going to be a very positive experience of a set aside where they're just asking me for some pricing and I know it has to be reasonable, but I'm not really trying to, I'm trying to make sure I've covered all my costs and deliver a high quality product. What about my indirect rates? When I'm pricing, indirect rates are the way that I say, I know that if I price this way, I've used percentages for fringe and overhead and G&A and fee to make sure that I'm covering all my costs and generating a reasonable profit. And I have a consistent way to calculate that so that when I'm bidding today, when it comes in 18 months from now, I know I'm still structurally about the same thing. And it's just like anything else. It's specific to your company. It's like a recipe, a way that you're going to grow, a way that you are moving ahead. And having indirect rates, understanding what they are, making sure you've got things properly classified, making sure that you have some idea of what you're going to do when you grow. If you added a new division, or you are coming in with a different line of work, or you decided to pick up a contract that had people at a government site and you've always had them in your own facility. You might be taking on training work instead of your normal staff augmentation work. How do your indirect rates get impacted by that? Under finance and accounting for federal contractors, obviously DCAA, Defense Contract Audit Agency compliance, is very important. So when you start out, you are not on DCAA's radar. You might be only working on fixed price contracts. You may only be working as a subcontractor under a prime contractor. All of these are variable levels of complexity that are going to require more compliance for DCAA. And many times when you're talking to a large prime contractor, they won't call it that. They'll say, are you compliant with CAS, cost accounting standards? Or people will say, are you FAR compliant? It's all variations on the same theme, and you need to understand what those rules are and make sure that your accounting system is set up to support it, because it is very specific to federal contracting. The way that costs are grouped into direct and indirect costs, the way that you have to identify unallowable costs such as interest, entertainment, sponsorships, contributions, gifts, the way that you break out your cost into pools such as fringe, overhead, and G&A. To pass a DCAA audit, you need to know what the rules are. You need to be able to respond to what's called an SF 1408, which is a standard form that DCAA does to perform an audit. What many companies are finding today, though, is that even though in the past, if they worked only fixed price, they'd never be asked for it. If they worked T&M or time and material type contracts where you're using fixed hourly billing rates, they weren't being asked very much. But what we're seeing is increasing levels of scrutiny, increasing levels of risk, especially if you're working with a prime contractor. They're starting to ask you to prove that you've got a DCAA compliant system. But you cannot call DCAA and order an audit. Only a contracting officer can order that. You as a small business are not going to have a DCAA audit ordered for you by the contracting audit office unless you're bidding on a cost plus contract and they've identified that you have to be DCAA compliant, and maybe during the questioning period you brought that up and they said, sure, we'll go ahead and get an audit performed for you. But otherwise, they're not going to spend the money because you're not in that market. Related to that, as I mentioned, a prime contractor, and many of them are doing this, are now on their own initiative sending you forms just like they send you the refs and certs when you're preparing to submit a proposal, that are asking you certain key questions that are following the same format as the SF 1408 pre-award survey. They're also frequently asking you to document it. Now, there's a fine line between what they're going to ask you to reveal about your financial information and them asking you about the structure of that data. For example, they may ask you to send how you calculate your indirect rates, but they might just have you black out the numbers, because I can look at a report without the numbers on it and tell immediately whether people know what they're doing or haven't got a clue. So the other thing that will happen is when they do these audits from these larger primes, they'll actually have Q&A. They'll ask you certain questions. They may do an interview over the phone, but they will ask you what's your process. They'll ask you for copies of policies and procedures, and they want to know if you know what they're doing, because if you're a subcontractor under their prime contract and you fail an audit, or you can't complete the billing, or you've got issues where you've overbilled or created other errors, and they can't confirm that the invoice that you submitted followed any kind of standards or just didn't make any sense, it's their responsibility. So they're taking that very seriously. And when they've got hundreds and thousands of small businesses to deal with, they're going to prioritize the ones that know what they're doing, and they're going to put the rest of the people that aren't really sure what DCAA compliance even means at the back of the line. The last thing I'd like to mention under finance and accounting is, do you have an integrated accounting process? Here's what I mean by that. You've got a payroll system. You've got a way that you create your billings. That might be in Excel. You have your accounting system, your accounting software. That might be QuickBooks. That's what most people start out on. You might have paper timesheets. You might have online timesheets. There are so many different versions of online timesheets, some of which will say they're DCA approved. That word does not exist. That's not actually a thing. You can only have DCA approval in the system in use, not on the software. Do you also have, what's your process for paying your payables? What's your process for completing travel expense reports and billing all of those to the customer? So the question becomes, do you have an integrated accounting system where all of that is in one flow system? It's most common that people will start with QuickBooks. They'll do their invoicing with Excel spreadsheets. They'll use Spring Ahead or another system for their timesheets. They might have a expense reports in Excel, or they might use a system like Spring Ahead or Uninet, whatever it is. Then there's the accounting system that actually produces the financial, where there's the bank statements and the credit card, all the reconciliation, being able to do a profit and loss. and a balance sheet and any other reporting. And then payroll, 99% of the people outsource their payroll, which I totally recommend, to ADP or Paychex or Paycom. There's so many different ones out there, and there are different ways that all needs to be integrated. So what do you mean by integrated? Well, in a perfect world, every time that I would send out an offer letter to somebody, my human resources system would be so integrated that it would set up a timesheet for the person so they could fill out the timesheet on the first day. Now, that's going to take some work, and that's going to take a lot of effort. There are systems out there to do it. That would be a fully integrated accounting system. What we typically do as companies are growing is we connect the parts as we can and then get to the point where the company is at a reasonable size, say 25 to 50 employees, and can get an integrated accounting system that's going to have most of those components in one piece. But as you think about it, we have all of those other elements, including program management, business development, human resources, risk management. Everybody's got to have access to a lot of the same data in order to make all of this work. So that's finance and accounting. What have you got under invoicing and reporting? What have you got for financial capabilities? How are you doing your pricing? How are you doing your indirect rates? Are you DCAA compliant? And do you have an integrated accounting process? And to me, those are stages from the least mature to the most mature. Let's talk about business development. Business development includes capturing proposals. What's your level of maturity for that? Do you have processes for that? Does everybody know where that is? Or the spreadsheets and documents you need stored in a common place where a lot of people can have access to them if they need to? Another section of business development is you've gone to all the trouble to earn IDIQ contracts by getting on with different contract vehicles. Are they single award IDIQs, which means the work's going to come to you? Or are they multiple award schedule where you've got to bid for everything you're going to get? A lot of people are finding out that the investment hasn't really paid off because it's too hard to get the work, but you have to have the contract vehicles, whether it's that or a GS schedule, whatever it might be. Business development also usually are the people that has come up with what goes in the capability brochure. What does it look like on the website? What agencies are listed that we've done business with before? What kind of testimonials might we have? What are my points of contact? Because that's how most people are going to find you, is find out information about your company, look at your capabilities brochure if they met you in person or you emailed it to them. They'll go to your website, check it out, look at those things first. That's where they're going to start. What does that look like? And then the last thing that I believe is becoming more important is what's your overall marketing strategy? What are you using for contract relationship management or CRM? What's your branding? How do they remember you? What makes you unique? What makes you memorable? And then the last component of that is social. And by that I mean, are you active on Twitter? Are you doing things on LinkedIn? Are you on Facebook? Are you coordinating that? Is somebody running that for you? Do you have a way to do that? Because more and more, we're going to see that people have less time to get your attention, and email still important, but showing up and telling people about what you do by using these tools is going to be very important. Human resources, I've already mentioned, is very critical to us for onboarding employees and taking care of those employees once they're there. My question from a benchmarking standpoint is, how mature are you with your overall human resources processes? That means, what do you have written down? Do you have an employee handbook? Do you have policies and procedures? Do your supervisors have training? Do people know how to authorize? Do people know how they're supposed to do performance reviews? How often do you do that? What's the raise, the merit thing? Do you have bonuses? What's your compensation plan? Are you prepared or preparing for when your company goes over 50 employees to meet additional regulations? Are you complying with Fair Labor Standards Act? Do you have any Service Contract Act employees? All of these things are part of your human resources policy and practices that we really need to take a look at and see what your maturity level is. Same thing is true on recruiting process, and the reason that is so important is because you've got to be able to show that you're getting qualified employees, that they have the right background, that you've got a process for bringing them on board, and making sure that they can deliver on those contracts in those areas, and what your process is going to be to make them feel like they're a part of the company. From a program management standpoint, what do we emphasize? Well, obviously, we really want to execute that contract well. We want to have good reporting. We want to report our procedurals on time. We want to have good relationships with our customers. We want to understand. We want to let them know where we are on funding, if we're going to have any issues. If there's things that they need to know, go ahead and bring those up, because we're being evaluated all the time. And make sure that as a result of winning that contract and performing on it, that we're going to have the CPARs that we deserve for what we're doing, because that's how people are going to decide if they want to use this again or for something else. The other thing I threw under program management is the whole idea of advanced certifications, and what I mean by that are the things that differentiate you. CMMI might be one. Are you ISO certified? What type of specialties do you have? Do you have a bunch of IT people and they've got different certifications? Are you broad across a lot of different software and database or cloud or whatever it is, whatever your specialty is? What makes you different from your competitors? What are you known for? What are you good at? And how are you certifying it or showing that as part of the technical workforce performing? Contracts, obviously, this is a very big area where you're going to have somebody that understands federal contracting and understands the rules, is very familiar with the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations, knows how to respond to a request from a prime contractor or a contracting officer, can keep up with modifications, knows to watch for period performance end dates, knows how to keep up with past performance, really puts in place those processes for contract administration so that you are able to grow and scale your business. And the other thing that's a maturity level to me is, what's your process for onboarding new contracts? Every time you get something new, do you have kickoff meetings? Who meets? When do you review? How often do you check back in? Are you going up to travel with the customer and meet with them? Are you having to onboard employees at that site? Are you having to rebadge people quickly? How quickly can you respond? And what are your processes? Risk management to me is all encompassing, and when I put down the word legal, the first reason I put it down is that there are certain things that you do need to go talk to an attorney about, and I'd recommend that you go to have a government contract attorney on your team or on call, because even when you first set up your legal entity, making the choice about whether to be a subchapter S or an LLC is very important to your future strategies. What's your ownership going to be? Do you have buy-sell agreements? Do you have subcontract agreements, teaming agreements? What are going to be your processes? How are you going to protect the company? Do you have a relationship where you can pick up the phone on a Friday afternoon and say, we're not sure how to respond to it? Or could your failure to pick up the phone and ask that attorney a question that you might have spent several hours on, it might have cost you a couple $1,000s, that by not doing that, you just lost several $1 million contract and all the future that would have created for you. Risk management obviously includes security and IT. Could be your obviously your cybersecurity, your password security, all of those things. Could be your security clearances. Do you have a site clearance, facility clearance? Who has clearances? How are you maintaining it? How are you training it? What are your practices? What's your email security? Do people understand not to respond to certain things, not to click on those links? How are you filtering? What are you doing to protect yourself? FSO processes, what is your process for making sure all the security requirements are being monitored and that you've got somebody that is qualified as an FSO that's taking care of that? And then the last piece of that is cybersecurity compliance, which we believe is going to be one of the top areas that people are going to have to be concerned about. So I'm really just thinking about this as benchmarking and the priorities, and I'm talking to companies about where they are in this process. What do they think it should look like? How do they rank against each other? And I actually have a benchmarking survey that I'm asking people to go through where they can rank themselves pretty much from 1 to 5 on it, where 1 is no clue, 2 is need help, 3 is I have a basic understanding, probably good enough, 4 is I'm advanced, I know what I'm doing in that area, and 5 is I could teach that class because I've gone through it so much. And I give examples for that of people that I know. If I needed to call somebody that had issues about how do I set up a JV, I'd know people that could talk about it. Those are the could teach people. But looking across that entire list of benchmarking and priorities is what I'm doing, of creating a benchmarking survey with the idea that it helps people to identify where they are in maturity, to help them identify a roadmap. Some of the items on this list are not that important to you, and you need to know where you are, and if I solve X, does that not take care of item 2 and item 17? Those are the type of things that we're really trying to look for so that you can self-evaluate where you are, have an idea of where you want to go, and make sure that you're headed in the right direction by the way you're choosing your priorities and spending your resources. So in any case, thanks so much for sitting in on today's session. I'm looking forward to talking to anybody. We've got the Florida GovCon Summit in Orlando coming up February 28th through March the 1st. We also have all kinds of training and coaching programs that we can work with federal contractors on. So if you would like more information, if you just want to give me a call at 256-882-6276. I'm in Clearwater, Florida, and my email is jwclark@solvability.com, and you can certainly catch me on LinkedIn or visit our website at solvability.com. So thanks so much for your attention.